In today's video, we will talking about Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, inside the heart of the Bayou's only female prison. Hidden beyond the cane fields of St. Gabriel, Louisiana, lies a place few outside the system truly understand, a prison built for women, yet haunted by the same violence, resilience, and redemption found in America's toughest men's facilities. This is the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, the state's only female prison, where stories of motherhood, addiction, faith, and survival intertwine behind barbed wire and cypress trees. Tonight, we step inside its gates to uncover what life is really like for the women society forgot.
Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started.
The beginning, from farmland to female prison. The Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, or LCIW, stands on a quiet stretch of rural land in St. Gabriel, about 20 miles south of Baton Rouge. Established in 1961, the facility was originally a part of the state's correctional farm system, modeled after the infamous Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, which itself was once a working plantation. LCIW was founded to separate female inmates from the male population at Angola and Hunt Correctional Center. Before its creation, women in Louisiana's prison system were often housed in old barracks or outdated sections of male facilities, with little consideration for gender-specific needs such as maternity care, hygiene, or mental health. From the start, LCIW was designed as a multi-security level facility, housing minimum, medium, and maximum custody inmates. Over time, it evolved into a complex institution, part prison, part reformatory, and part rehabilitation center, reflecting Louisiana's evolving approach to women's incarceration. By the 1970s, the prison had become a symbol of both progress and contradiction. On one hand, it introduced educational and vocational programs that were ahead of their time, from sewing and cosmetology to parenting and literacy. On the other hand, reports of overcrowding, inadequate medical care, and the use of male correctional officers in female housing units raised serious concerns about safety and dignity. These early years laid the groundwork for decades of debate over how the state of Louisiana, known for having the highest incarceration rate in the nation, would treat its women behind bars. A prison like no other, daily life behind the gates. At its peak, LCIW held over 900 inmates, making it one of the largest women's prisons in the southern United States. But despite its size, the atmosphere was markedly different from its male counterparts. Each day began before sunrise. Inmates lined up for headcount as the humid air settled over the compound. Breakfast was served in the main chow hall, typically grits, powdered eggs, and toast, before the women were divided for work assignments. Work programs were central to LCIW's structure. Women worked in the prison's garment factory, producing uniforms for other Louisiana prisons, or in agricultural operations that supplied food to correctional facilities across the state. Some inmates were assigned to trustee positions, assisting staff in administration, kitchen duties, or groundskeeping. Unlike Angola or Dixon Correctional Institute, LCIW also hosted mothers with children, through a limited nursery program and visitation initiatives aimed at preserving family bonds. Faith-based ministries and volunteer organizations played an outsized role in shaping daily life, offering Bible studies, addiction recovery groups, and re-entry classes. In many cases, these programs filled the gaps left by state funding cuts. However, reports from advocacy groups and former inmates painted a more complex picture. Inadequate medical care, outdated infrastructure, and limited access to mental health services remained persistent issues. Overcrowding often forced inmates to sleep in makeshift dorms, and disciplinary segregation, or the hole, was criticized for being used excessively. Still, amid hardship, there was community. Former inmates have described how women supported one another, shared scarce resources, and formed prison families, informal bonds that became emotional lifelines in an environment built to isolate. Disaster strikes, the flood of 2016. In August 2016, one of the most catastrophic floods in Louisiana history struck the Baton Rouge area, submerging thousands of homes, and the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. The compound, located near the Bayou floodplain, was not built to withstand such extreme weather. Rising waters breached the levees and flooded dormitories, workshops, and administrative offices. Within hours, hundreds of inmates were trapped as correctional officers worked around the clock to evacuate them. The prison lost power and clean water. Inmates waded through waist-deep floodwaters to reach buses and National Guard trucks. By the time the evacuation was complete, nearly 800 women had been relocated to other facilities, including the Elaine Hunt Correctional Center, the former Jetson Center for Youth, and temporary housing units set up by the DOC. The flood rendered LCIW uninhabitable. Dorms were destroyed, files ruined, and infrastructure severely damaged. What began as a short-term evacuation became a years-long displacement that fundamentally changed the state's female correctional system. For years afterward, Louisiana women were scattered across multiple facilities, often far from their families and legal counsel. Advocacy groups raised alarms about the psychological impact, disrupted rehabilitation programs, and increased isolation caused by the split. As of the late 2010s, rebuilding efforts stalled repeatedly, slowed by budget constraints, environmental challenges, and debate over whether LCIW should be rebuilt in the same flood-prone area. Rebuilding and relocation, a system in limbo. After the 2016 flood, Louisiana faced a complex question: should the only women's prison in the state be rebuilt, or relocated entirely? Initially, the Department of Corrections announced plans to rebuild on the original site in St. Gabriel. However, community members, environmental groups, and some state legislators argued against it, citing recurring floods, soil instability, and the potential for future displacement. By 2019, the state shifted toward a new plan, constructing a replacement facility on higher ground near the Hunt Correctional Center. In the interim, female inmates remained housed at temporary sites, creating logistical and emotional strain for both inmates and staff. Reports revealed that some women were being held in male prisons retrofitted for female use, raising concerns about safety and privacy. Legal advocacy organizations such as the Promise of Justice Initiative and the ACLU of Louisiana filed complaints over conditions, including limited access to healthcare, education, and visitation. Even staff members described the period as chaotic. Programs were cut back, mental health services were disrupted, and families struggled to locate incarcerated relatives as transfers became frequent. Despite the challenges, some progress emerged. Re-entry programs were restructured, and faith-based volunteers helped maintain a sense of continuity. By the early 2020s, construction on the new LCIW facility near St. Gabriel was underway, designed with improved drainage, expanded medical facilities, and dedicated spaces for family visitation and trauma-informed care. Life in transition, the women of LCIW after the flood. In the years following the flood, the women displaced from LCIW faced an uncertain reality. Many were housed in the Jetson Correctional Center for Youth, a facility never intended for adult incarceration. Temporary dorms lacked proper heating, cooling, and medical infrastructure. A 2018 investigation by the Advocate and PBS NewsHour revealed troubling details. Some inmates reported waiting weeks for medical appointments, others said overcrowded dorms lacked functioning toilets or adequate privacy. Correctional officers, many reassigned from other institutions, were often overworked and undertrained for the specific needs of female inmates, including those with histories of trauma, pregnancy, or substance abuse. Still, amid the instability, programs like Louisiana Reentry Initiative for Women and Mothers Advocacy Project tried to continue. Faith groups from Baton Rouge and New Orleans organized weekend visits, and nonprofit organizations worked to restore access to vocational and GED programs. Many women interviewed described the emotional toll of the displacement. One former inmate told reporters, "When we lost LCIW, we lost our sense of home, even though it was a prison." Their words reflected a deeper truth. For many incarcerated women, especially long-term inmates, the prison had become a structured environment where identity, purpose, and community existed, even within confinement. Reform, resistance, and redemption, the fight to change women's incarceration in Louisiana. In the aftermath of the 2016 flood and the chaotic relocations that followed, Louisiana's women's prison system faced unprecedented scrutiny. For the first time in decades, advocates, journalists, and lawmakers began asking fundamental questions. What does justice mean for women in Louisiana? And what does rehabilitation look like when the system itself is broken? The Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women became the center of that conversation. The rise of advocacy and legal challenges. Between 2017 and 2021, several advocacy groups, including the Louisiana Women's Incarceration Project, the Promise of Justice Initiative, PJA, and the ACLU of Louisiana, launched investigations and legal actions concerning conditions faced by displaced inmates. They highlighted issues such as limited access to mental health care and trauma-informed counseling, lack of prenatal and postnatal support for incarcerated mothers, overuse of disciplinary segregation in temporary facilities, unsafe housing conditions in male prisons retrofitted for women. Reports detailed how women with histories of domestic abuse, addiction, or mental illness were being held in facilities not designed to address those realities. The ACLU noted that Louisiana's female prisoners are invisible in the public conversation about incarceration, yet they suffer some of the harshest consequences of a system built for men. This activism didn't stop at criticism. It sparked new policy discussions. In 2018, Governor John Bel Edwards's Justice Reinvestment Initiative sought to reduce Louisiana's overall prison population through sentencing reforms and reentry support. Part of that reform focused specifically on female offenders, aiming to divert nonviolent women from prison toward community-based alternatives. While implementation was uneven, it represented a philosophical shift, recognizing that incarceration for women often stems from cycles of poverty, abuse, and addiction, not predatory crime. Inside the push for reentry and rehabilitation, the LCIW community, despite displacement, continued to evolve. With the support of NGOs and religious organizations, reentry programs became a lifeline for many inmates nearing release. These programs taught vocational skills, financial literacy, and emotional regulation, but they also offered something intangible: hope. The Reentry Court Program, pioneered in East Baton Rouge Parish, began accepting women from LCIW-related facilities. Participants who completed addiction recovery and job training could have their sentences reduced. The approach was rooted in evidence-based psychology rather than punishment. A rare turn in Louisiana's notoriously punitive justice system. One participant, quoted in a 2020 PBS NewsHour feature, described it this way: "For the first time, I wasn't being treated like a number. They looked at me as someone who could change." The Louisiana Department of Corrections also introduced limited but meaningful educational expansions, GED classes, culinary training, and cosmetology certification. Faith-based partnerships like the Returning Heart Celebration brought inmates together with family members for supervised reunions, moments that became emotional milestones for many mothers. Still, critics argued that these programs, while valuable, reached too few. Hundreds of women remained in temporary housing with inconsistent access to these opportunities. Without full restoration of LCIW, reform could only go so far. A silent struggle, the mental health crisis. Perhaps the most overlooked aspect of the LCIW story is mental health. According to DOC data and independent audits, over 70% of women in Louisiana's correctional system have histories of trauma, substance abuse, or mental illness. After the 2016 flood, mental health services became fragmented. Counselors were reassigned, records lost, and therapy sessions halted. Inmates reported increased rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. Some women described how isolation, especially in temporary lockdown environments, deepened their trauma. One former inmate recounted, "We weren't just displaced from the prison, we were displaced from the only structure we knew." In response, organizations like Operation Restoration and Women with a Vision stepped in to provide limited post-release therapy and support networks. Yet inside the facilities, consistent psychiatric care remained rare. The issue wasn't confined to individual suffering, it affected public safety. Studies showed that untreated mental illness among incarcerated women increased recidivism rates, creating a cycle that Louisiana's system struggled to break. Faith, hope, and the role of religion. Religion has always played an outsized role at LCIW. Long before the flood, the prison had a reputation for its strong faith-based community, with dozens of volunteer ministries conducting Bible studies, recovery circles, and mentoring sessions. After the displacement, these faith programs became more than spiritual outlets, they were psychological anchors. Organizations like Kairos Prison Ministry, Catholic Charities, and the Church at St. Gabriel continued to visit temporary facilities, offering counseling, correspondence courses, and mentorship. Inmates often described these encounters as transformative. For many, religion was not just belief, it was survival. Chaplains and volunteers helped maintain continuity across sites, ensuring that the women's sense of community, purpose, and humanity wasn't entirely erased by bureaucratic chaos. By 2022, several chaplains and volunteers were honored by the Louisiana DOC for extraordinary service in crisis, recognizing their role in stabilizing the displaced LCIW population. A new beginning, rebuilding the future of LCIW. By 2022, construction officially began on the new Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, located adjacent to the Elaine Hunt Correctional Center on high ground in St. Gabriel. The new facility was designed with lessons from the past in mind. Modern flood protection systems. Expanded healthcare facilities. Dedicated mental health wings. Family visitation units with privacy and child-friendly spaces. Classrooms, vocational centers, and therapeutic dorms. According to official renderings, the prison would also feature low-rise housing pods instead of the traditional cell block design, intended to promote rehabilitation over isolation. Louisiana's DOC described the approach as a new model for women's corrections in the Deep South. However, not everyone celebrated. Critics argued that Louisiana was investing millions in rebuilding incarceration, not reducing it. They pointed to alternative solutions like halfway houses, treatment programs, and community supervision that could lower costs and improve outcomes. Yet for many of the women still displaced, the new facility represented something tangible: stability. After 6 years of uncertainty, they would finally have a place designed for them, not borrowed from others. Human stories, lives behind the walls. Every prison has its walls. But the story of LCIW is less about concrete and more about the people who lived, and changed, within them. The mothers. LCIW has always held a high percentage of incarcerated mothers, many separated from young children. Programs like the Nursery Visitation Initiative and Parenting from Prison tried to bridge that gap, allowing mothers to record bedtime stories or exchange letters. Some women, upon release, became advocates for reform. One such figure, Sharonda Williams, began speaking publicly about the need for trauma-informed sentencing. After serving 7 years at LCIW for nonviolent drug offenses, she now mentors women re-entering society through Operation Restoration. She told NOLA.com, "LCIW broke me down, but it also built me back up. I found faith, I found accountability, and I found my purpose helping other women not end up here." The survivors of abuse. According to state reports, nearly 80% of LCIW inmates had experienced domestic or sexual violence before incarceration. The cycle of trauma was evident in case files and sentencing patterns. Advocacy projects began documenting these stories, not as excuses, but as context. They revealed how abuse, poverty, and limited access to legal defense often collided to create pathways to prison. By 2020, some district courts in Louisiana began experimenting with trauma-informed courts, diverting qualifying female defendants into rehabilitation programs rather than jail time. The policy was partly inspired by years of testimony from LCIW survivors. The Lifers. LCIW also houses lifers, women serving life without parole. Many arrived decades ago under Louisiana's strict sentencing laws, often linked to felony murder charges or accomplice liability. Within the walls, some became mentors, artists, or leaders in peer support groups. Their long sentences gave them authority, and, in some cases, peace. A 2019 Times-Picayune interview with a 62-year-old lifer captured it perfectly. You learn to live small, to find meaning in inches, in a book, a prayer, a letter. That's how you survive here. Their stories underscore a reality few see, that redemption can exist even where freedom doesn't. From flooded cell blocks to rebuilding lives, the story of the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women isn't just about punishment, it's about resilience, reform, and the fight for dignity inside America's prison system. If you found this documentary informative, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps more people discover the real stories behind the walls. And remember, every number in a prison record is a person with a story worth hearing. Warning: this documentary is based entirely on verified reports, court filings, and credible journalism sources. All information was drawn from the Louisiana Department of Corrections, FEMA records, the Advocate, NPR, and public legal archives. Thank you for watching.